The Secret of Conde, Hermanos, Chapter 13. It had been a long and intimate ceremony at the meditation garden next to the natural spring-fed lake, where Blaise was so fond of going to feed the swans. In a quaint windmill chapel, with only Helena, Lysander, Alice, Gwen, and Helena's brother Jack, who had driven down from Stanford in attendance, Blaise had been christened. Afterward, a small reception followed in Dr. Cordero's backyard, at Gwen's suggestion, since it was located so conveniently close to the chapel. Alice, being the godmother, provided the cream cheese frosted carrot cake, moist yet richly textured with walnuts and raisins, which a friend who managed the tea room at the Getty Museum had let her purchase in a quarter-sheet size. Jack, being the godfather, brought several bottles of award-winning Monterey County sparkling wine, which he had carefully packed in his trunk as he drove down the coast the day before. Gwen had practiced both the Soleares and the Sigues flamenco forms on the Conde Hermanos and planned to concertnate under the eucalyptus tree from which the monarch butterflies had so recently departed. Lysander had brought his vintage Nikon camera, fully loaded, and was ready to document the entire day for all posterity. Helena had her hands full with Blaise, who had begun to walk of late, and took an active interest in all new surroundings, feeling the need to investigate every nook and cranny thoroughly. However, in the presence of other adults, she tended to cling to Helena and wanted to be held. "Is she talking yet?" Alice inquired. She had just returned from 2 months in Spain, and Blaise had still been only babbling when she left. "She is in a manner of speaking," Helena replied. "She favors certain words over others. Currently, she likes knows a lot," she giggled. And as if on cue, Blaise, who was in Helena's arms, pointed to the middle of Alice's face and said, "Nose." She then said, "Nose," again, and yet again, and again. "For heaven's sake, point to her nose and say nose. It's the only way she'll stop," Helena instructed her friend, and indeed it did work, thankfully, for the time being at least. "How wonderful you could come down from Stanford," Gwen remarked to Jack, having introduced him to him earlier by Lysander. "And what do you study there?" "Marine biology," he replied. "Which means that my real campus is the Hopkins Marine Station, which is at Stanford Research Facility." "Do you specialize in anything particular?" Gwen inquired further. "I do, actually. The evolutionary biology of marine mammals fascinates me, particularly that of seals." "Why is that?" Gwen was becoming intrigued. "I suppose because they haven't left the land behind as completely as the other aquatic orders of mammals, such as the whales and the dolphins. They may have streamlined their bodies to a great extent, but they've retained all their forelimbs and their terrestrial ancestors. Oddly enough, they don't even know how to swim when they're born. Without a mother to teach them, they would actually drown," he said in utter amazement. "These are the kinds of mysteries that keep evolutionary biologists awake at night," he said, smiling, and then added with a wink, "Since you asked." "Lysander," Helena interrupted in an air of urgency. "She's fussing. Did you happen to pack her sardines?" "Her sardines?" Alice echoed, questioning incredulously. "Honestly, Helena, what sort of creature are you raising out there on the canals of Venice?" "Well, one with a mind of her own, that's for sure," she answered, as she gazed at her offspring with abject pride. "She won't eat anything else. And to answer your question, my darling, no, I didn't pack sardines," Lysander said, with considerable concern. What with so much going on, they slipped my mind." "I see," Helena said, with an equally worried expression. Blaise was at the age when temper tantrums are not uncommon, and could easily ensue by not accommodating her rather strong food preferences. "Problem solved," chimed Gwen. "Bartholomew and Blaise have similarly strong preferences for sardines. There are cans of them in the kitchen. help yourself, and put a couple of them on a saucer on the floor. Bartholomew and Blaise will be much obliged." And so, with Blaise and the cats contentedly eating sardines, the cake was cut and served. After the first serving showered with chrysanthemums that Alice had picked, growing wild on the bluffs near her where she had parked, "They're perfectly edible," she assured her guests. Helena had replied teasingly, "They better be," the sparkling wine having festively uncorked, and poured glasses having been raised, and appropriate toasts made. It seemed time to bring out the Conde Hermanos. Blankets were spread on the grass near the eucalyptus tree, and a chair with a footrest put on place for Gwen beneath it. She prefaced her concert with a brief introduction that went like this. "Since the audience today consists of young Honoré Blaise, as well as your parents, godparents, not to mention 2 fine cats, of course, I should like to play for you all what are considered to be the founding parents of flamenco music, the Soleares and the Segurillas. Together, they have spawned a complex family of many unique and dissimilar children, but still they remain recognizable as the original source for each child's makeup. As the Conde Hermanos began to sing and vibrate with the age-old rhythms from which it had been designed, a hush fell over the small audience. Something in the soul of each listener stirred in its own way. The cats ceased to browse on the green young blades of grass, and also settled their stomachs after a feast of sardines, and Blaise stopped munching on the sour grass, of which he had grabbed a small fistful, attracted by the bright yellow flowers, no doubt. "That can't be good for her," Alice said, hoarsely whispered, while it was Helena's turn to insist they were perfectly edible. "All young children in California grow up eating sour grass," she whispered back. Lysander, out of respect for the musician's concentration, refrained from taking photographs, while Jack, with his eyes closed, was certainly contemplating deep and ancient evolutionary mysteries. Although the monarchs had long since left, cabbage whites, who were the year-round residents, danced in their place in the bottle-brush tree. When the music of the Conde Hermanos had at last subsided, and before even the listeners could descend from their respective clouds to applaud, something strange occurred. Out of nowhere, a cold sundowner wind began to blow. The sky grew dark. A light followed by a heavy rain started to fall. Soon it was a downpour. Cats were the first to take cover in the house, as the French doors had been left open. Helena scooped up Blaise. Gwen hurriedly put the Conde Hermanos in its case and removed the wind chimes from the bottle-bush tree, while Lysander, Alice, and Jack scrambled to bring the blankets and assorted glasses and dishes that were strewn about. True, it was rainy season, but no rain had been forecast, and they had all been caught completely off guard. When everyone was safe inside, Gwen put a log on the fireplace and made a pot of tea. "More cakes, anyone?" she offered. Maybe a sliver would be nice," Alice said, blowing her steaming mug of coffee. "Me too," said Lysander. "Me 3, said Jack. "That settles it," Helen laughed. "Slivers for all. Here, I'll help you, Gwen." With everyone seated around the fireplace enjoying coffee and yet more carrot cake, Jack spoke first. "That was an interesting experience," he posited. "And as a scientist, I'm bound to honor the old credo. Correlation is not causation. However, at the risk of sounding highly unscientific, the end of the music and the change of the weather did seem strangely connected." He came to the conclusion, only half jokingly. There's no question," Alice assured him. "My Uncle Jerry told me many stories of this happening in Spain, and always during Lenten season, when there are long processions in the streets, and the sangria's rhythm is played," he said. "Quite often, they're rained out. Well, Jack went on ruminating, trying to maintain some semblance of scientific objectivity. Spain and California do share that rather atypical Mediterranean climate, meaning they both have wet winters and springs. It was just as uncanny and unexpected timing that made it seem so, heck, let it be said, supernatural. It was most definitely supernatural, Alice stated plainly. What is it about gathering around fireplaces on rainy nights that turns one's thoughts to the supernatural? Helena asked playfully. Well, not to break the spell, but when you're headed back up north, Jack, Lysander queried, starting to gather up his family's belongings. Oh, early in the morning, Jack answered, finishing his last swallow of coffee. Time and harbor seals wait for no man, and I've got lots of field work left to do on a project I'm in the middle of, actually. Well, one of these days, Helena and Blaise and I will pay you a visit. I'd love to see the new I'd love to see the new harbor seal colony at Hopkins. I've been hearing so much about it lately. Sounds like something well worth photographing. Absolutely. Come anytime, my good man. Although spring is the best if you want to see the pupping season. Don't forget, they're shy and skittish, and you can't get close, so bring zoom lenses when you come. Will do, Lysander said, as he hoisted Blaise into his arms. She promptly pointed to the middle of Uncle Jack's face and said, Nose. Gwen laughed as she heard the disbanded christening party strolling to their cars in what had now become just a drizzle, playing the nose game as they went. The fire was almost burnt out as she sat in the sunny darkness to enjoy the last of the glowing embers. Blaise was curled up in her lap, purring, while Bartolome was lying by the fire with his tail curled around her ankle. And she reached down to scratch the top of his head, and he nuzzled her hand with his cool, wet nose. It occurred to her to bring Conde and Hermanos into their intimate circle and end the evening on a musical note. She disengaged herself gently from the cats and fetched the guitar from the case. But when she got down to play, she decided she had disturbed the mother and father of flamenco enough for one day, and they should be left alone. No, she would turn instead to the many and complex offspring, one of whom was light-hearted and full of energy, although traces of their parents were always discernible. Of course, she realized she would play an alegrias, because a noticeably quiet sense of happiness had indeed settled upon them all.